The crystal chandelier light reflected off my face as everyone applauded in celebration. But with just one sentence from the CEO, the recognition dinner transformed into a public tribunal of humiliation. He thought I would silently endure. He didn't know I had planted a contractual bomb that could detonate his $1.9 billion empire overnight. The champagne in my hand remained steady, even as my world tilted. 14 years of sacrifice, and this was my reward, a 70% salary cut, announced like a toast to my dedication. My name is Elena Marquez, and at 38 years old, I had given Dynacore Systems everything: my youth, my dreams, my very soul. Tonight was supposed to be my vindication, the moment 14 years of invisible sacrifice became visible glory. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel sparkled with promise, its marble columns wrapped in silver ribbons, digital screens displaying celebrating innovation in elegant script that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air tasted of champagne and anticipation. 200 of Silicon Valley's elite mingled beneath the vaulted ceiling, their designer suits and cocktail dresses creating a sea of calculated elegance. I stood near the center stage, accepting congratulations from colleagues who had watched me rebuild this company's infrastructure from the ground up. My black evening gown, the most expensive thing I'd ever bought for myself, felt like armor against years of being overlooked. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor Langford's voice boomed through the microphone, commanding instant silence. Our CEO stood at the podium, his silver hair gleaming under the spotlights, his Tom Ford suit impeccable as always. At 55, he wore inherited wealth like a second skin. Tonight, we celebrate the backbone of Dynacore Systems. The crowd turned toward me. Cameras flashed. I felt my sister's proud gaze from table 12, where she sat with her husband. She'd driven 3 hours to witness this moment, her big sister finally getting the recognition she deserved. "Elena Marquez," Victor continued, raising his crystal flute, "has been with us for 14 years, our chief infrastructure architect, the woman who single-handedly prevented the Melbourne server crisis last year." Applause thundered through the hall. I smiled, though something in Victor's tone made my spine tighten. His smile was too sharp, like a blade disguised as jewelry. "Which is why," he paused, savoring the moment like aged wine. "It pains me to announce that due to necessary restructuring, Ms. Marquez's compensation will be adjusted to reflect current market realities." The room held its breath. My fingers found the edge of the table for support. "Effective immediately, her salary will be reduced by 70%. His words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the crowd. "Of course, we value Elena's continued dedication to Dynacore, and we trust she understands that sacrifice is the cornerstone of innovation." The music had stopped. Someone's champagne glass clinged against a plate. The only sound in a room suddenly transformed into a coliseum. 200 pairs of eyes swiveled between Victor and me, waiting to see if the gladiator would bleed. My throat constricted. 14 years of 80-hour weeks, of missing my father's funeral because of a system emergency, of raising my sister alone while building Victor's digital empire reduced to a public spectacle of humiliation. The walls seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, the chandelier light suddenly too bright, too hot. But I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I lifted my champagne glass, my hands steady as surgical steel, and met Victor's gaze. His gray eyes glittered with satisfaction, feeding on my humiliation like a parasite on its host. "To innovation," I said, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. The crowd reluctantly raised their glasses, the gesture hollow and uncomfortable. Victor's smile widened, mistaking my composure for submission. He thought he had won, that I would crawl back to my desk Monday morning, broken and compliant. He had no idea what he had just triggered. As the evening dissolved into awkward conversations and hasty departures, I remained perfectly still, a statue carved from rage and calculation. My sister reached for my hand under the table, her touch the only warm thing in a world suddenly turned arctic. "Elena," she whispered, but I squeezed her fingers gently, stopping her words. "Not here," I murmured, watching Victor work the room, accepting condolences for the difficult decision he'd been forced to make. "Not yet." The contract modifications I had embedded 2 years ago flickered through my mind like a countdown timer. Victor had just lit the fuse himself, in front of 200 witnesses. By tomorrow night, his empire would be ash. The drive home from the Meridian felt like traveling through a time tunnel, each mile peeling back another year of my life at Dynacor. My sister Sophia sat beside me in silence, knowing better than to probe the wound while it was still fresh. The city lights blurred past my windshield, but all I could see were the ghosts of 14 years haunting the dashboard. I was 24 when I first walked into Dynacor's lobby, a nobody with a computer science degree and a mountain of medical debt from Dad's cancer treatments. He'd died 3 months before my interview, leaving me as Sophia's only guardian. She was just 16 then, all teenage rage and grief, needing stability I couldn't afford to not provide. The early years were brutal. I remember my first crisis 3:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve. The European servers crashed, threatening millions in transactions. While other junior engineers claimed family obligations, I drove through the snow to the office, Sophia asleep in the break room while I rebuilt the system architecture from scratch. 8 hours later, I'd saved the company $43 million. My reward, a 2-line email from Victor. Acceptable work, don't let it happen again. That became my pattern, the invisible guardian angel of Dynacor's infrastructure. When the Tokyo expansion nearly collapsed due to incompatible protocols, I spent 3 weeks living in the office, debugging 20 million lines of code. Sophia would bring me clothes and meals, studying for her SATs in the corner while I prevented international catastrophe. "Remember when you missed my high school graduation?" Sophia said suddenly, breaking the silence in the car. "The ransomware attack," I whispered. 2,000 servers encrypted. If I hadn't... "I know." She squeezed my shoulder. "I wasn't bringing it up to hurt you. I'm saying I watched you choose them over everything, again and again. You gave them everything. Elena." Everything. My 20s dissolved into server rooms and code reviews. My 30s began with the Melbourne crisis. A cascading failure that could have destroyed Dynacor's entire Asian presence. For 96 consecutive hours, I held the system together with digital duct tape and sheer will, manually rerouting traffic, rewriting protocols in real time while the board of directors watched via video conference. Victor had stood behind them, his face a mask of cold calculation, when I finally stabilized the system, preventing losses estimated at $300 million. He'd simply nodded and left the room. The next day, a company-wide email credited the leadership team for their swift response. My name appeared nowhere. But I'd learned to document everything by then. Screenshots, emails, code commits, a digital diary of every save, every innovation, every moment I'd pulled Dynacor from the brink. The folder on my personal drive grew to 60 gigabytes of evidence that I was never just an employee. I was the architect of their survival. "You know what the worst part was?" I said, pulling into my driveway. It wasn't the missed birthdays or the forgotten holidays. It was believing that one day it would mean something, that loyalty and excellence would eventually be recognized. Sophia studied my face in the dim light. "You're planning something." I killed the engine, listening to it tick as it cooled. "Do you remember when Dad taught us about controlled demolitions, how you need to understand every support beam, every point of failure?" Elena. For 2 years, I've been the only one who truly understands Dynacor's infrastructure. Every contract, every security protocol, every redundancy. Victor thinks I'm just a cog in his machine. He never bothered to learn that I am the machine. We sat in the darkness of my garage, the automatic light long since timed out. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal life continued around us, oblivious to the tectonic shift about to occur in Silicon Valley's landscape. "All those sacrifices," I continued, my voice steady as granite, "weren't for nothing. They were reconnaissance. Every missed dinner taught me their weaknesses. Every crisis I solved alone showed me their dependencies. Every time Victor took credit for my work, he revealed how little he understands about what actually keeps his empire standing." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then, with the same fierce protectiveness she'd shown since Dad died, she asked, "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing," I said, finally opening the car door. "Just watch. By Monday morning, 14 years of sacrifice are going to pay their dividend, and Victor Langford is going to learn that when you build your kingdom on someone else's foundation, You should probably make sure they don't know where all the cracks are. Victor Langford was born into power the way some people are born into poverty, completely unaware that any other state of existence was possible. His father, Marcus Langford, had co-founded Dynacore Systems in a Palo Alto garage, building it with calloused hands and sleepless nights. But Victor inherited an empire at 32 when Marcus died of a heart attack, stepping into a throne he'd never earned. I'd studied him for 14 years, the way a biologist studies a virus. Every Monday morning, he arrived at precisely 8:15 a.m. in his Bentley. License plate Dynasio Subtlety was never his strength. His corner office occupied the entire 40th floor, a temple to his ego decorated with abstract art worth more than most people's homes and photos of him with politicians who probably couldn't remember his name. The first time I truly understood Victor's nature was during my 3rd year at Dynacore. A junior developer named Marcus Kim had discovered a critical security flaw that could have exposed millions of users' data. Instead of thanking Marcus, Victor had him sign an NDA, fired him for performance issues, then presented the fix to the board as his own discovery. I watched Marcus pack his desk in tears. His H-1B visa dependent on employment he'd just lost for being too good at his job. Fear is more reliable than respect, Victor had once told the senior staff during a strategy meeting. Respect can be lost. Fear is forever. He ruled through public humiliation, making examples of employees in all-hands meetings. I'd seen him reduce a marketing director to tears for suggesting a campaign he disliked, spending 20 minutes dissecting her incompetence while 300 employees watched via video conference. The woman resigned the next day. Victor called it natural selection in the corporate ecosystem. But his cruelest talent was the surgical precision with which he identified what mattered most to each person, then held it hostage. For the senior developer with a special needs child, it was health insurance. For the project manager sending money to family in India, it was visa sponsorship. For me, he thought it was reputation and financial stability, the twin pillars supporting my sister's future. He was half right. Victor had never built anything himself. When code needed debugging, he summoned engineers. When systems failed, he demanded fixes without understanding the problems. He spoke in buzzwords and PowerPoint slides. A conductor who couldn't read music leading an orchestra of virtuosos too frightened to correct him. I remember watching him during the Melbourne crisis, pacing behind the emergency response team, barking orders that made no technical sense. "Just make it work," he'd shouted, as if volume could substitute for competence. When I'd tried to explain the cascade failure pattern, he'd cut me off. "I don't need explanations, Elena. I need solutions. That's why I keep you around." Keep me around, like I was a spare part in his garage. The board of directors saw him as a visionary because he could translate our work into language they understood: profit margins and market share. What they didn't see were the engineers working 100-hour weeks to manifest his impossible promises. The architects like me holding the infrastructure together with digital prayers and caffeine. Victor's leadership philosophy was simple: claim credit for all successes, delegate blame for all failures. When our revolutionary cloud migration succeeded, he gave a TED Talk about his innovative approach. When a minor outage occurred, he publicly fired the responsible team, despite the fact that they'd been following his direct orders to cut corners on redundancy. He collected loyalty through fear and competence through acquisition, buying smaller companies and gutting them for talent. But he never understood that talent without morale is like a garden without water. It might look green for a while, but it's already dying. The most telling moment came last year during the company retreat. After drinks, Victor had cornered me near the pool, his breath thick with whiskey. "You know what your problem is, Elena," he'd said, swaying slightly. "You think being indispensable means something, but everyone's replaceable. My father taught me that. Even him heart attack at 61, and Dynacore didn't miss a beat." "Your father built this company," I'd replied quietly. "And I perfected it," he'd shot back. "He was too soft, too concerned with being liked. I turned his mom-and-pop operation into a billion-dollar empire. You think that happens by being nice?" Standing there, watching him mistake inheritance for achievement, cruelty for strength, I realized something: Victor Langford had never created anything. He was a parasite in an expensive suit, feeding off the brilliance of people he despised. He'd never known the satisfaction of building something from nothing, of solving an impossible problem at 4 a.m. when the world depended on you. He'd never earned his power, which meant he'd never learned how to protect it. Tonight, at the gala, when he'd announced my salary cut with that satisfied smirk, he'd revealed his fatal flaw he believed his own myth. He thought fear would keep me in line, that humiliation would ensure my compliance. He was about to learn that when you build your empire on the backs of people you've broken, you should make sure they don't know how to break things too. The Meridian Hotel's service corridor was dimly lit, a stark contrast to the glittering ballroom I'd just escaped. I needed air, space to think, to process the public execution I'd just endured. My heels clicked against the concrete floor as I made my way toward the loading dock, seeking solitude in the unglamorous corners where Victor Langford would never deign to venture. That's when I heard his voice, echoing from around the corner near the service elevator. Victor was on his phone, but speakerphone because of course he needed everyone to hear his importance, even in an empty hallway. "Richard, you should have seen it." Victor's voice dripped with satisfaction. The look on her face when I announced the 70% cut, priceless, better than firing her outright. My hand found the wall, steadying myself as I listened. "You really think she'll stay?" Richard's voice. I recognized it as Richard Brennan, the CFO. Victor laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Where else would she go?" "She's 38, Richard, single. Her entire identity is tied to Dynacor. Plus, she's got that sister to support the one she put through college on our dime." "Seems risky, considering how much she knows about our infrastructure." "That's exactly why she'll stay," Victor responded, his arrogance thick as tar. "She'll crawl back to her desk Monday morning like the good little worker bee she is. Maybe she'll cry in the bathroom for a few minutes, update her resume that she'll never send out, but ultimately she'll accept it. They always do. And if she doesn't, then I'll destroy her," Victor said simply. "Non-compete clause means she can't work for any competitor for 3 years. I'll make sure every tech company in the valley knows she's difficult, unstable. You know how this works. Richard, a few phone calls, some strategic rumors about her being hard to work with, maybe hint at some mental health issues. She'll be radioactive." My fingernails dug into my palms, creating half-moon indentations I wouldn't notice until later. "Besides," Victor continued, "I did her a favor tonight. Public humiliation builds character. My father did the same to me when I started at Dynacor, kept me hungry, kept me sharp. Although," he chuckled, "I was smart enough to be born a Langford, so I knew it was temporary. Elena, she'll die at that desk, grateful for whatever scraps I throw her." The board approved this. "The board doesn't need to know everything. They see the bottom line. Cutting her salary saves us $500,000 annually. That's $500,000 more for my bonus. It's just good business." There was a pause. Then Richard asked, "What about the contracts she manages, the infrastructure deals?" "What about them? She set them up. She'll maintain them. For 30% of her previous salary. She'll keep doing exactly what she's been doing. That's the beauty of it. She's too professionally invested to let them fail. Her pride won't let her walk away from her life's work. I know her type. Richard, martyrs, they confuse suffering with nobility." The elevator dinged, and I heard Victor step inside. "One more thing," his voice carried as the doors began to close. "Make sure the announcement about her new compensation structure makes it into Monday's internal newsletter. I want everyone to know what happens when someone thinks they're irreplaceable. Fear is a better motivator than any performance bonus." The elevator doors closed, leaving me alone in the corridor with his words echoing in my skull like struck bells. Each syllable was a nail in the coffin of any hesitation I might have felt. I walked back to the ballroom in a trance, his words on repeat. "She'll crawl back to her desk Monday morning." Sophia was waiting by the coat check, my jacket already in her hands. She took one look at my face and knew something had shifted. "Elena, we're leaving," I said quietly, taking my coat. As we walked through the lobby, past the remnants of my humiliation colleagues who averted their eyes, the banner still mockingly declaring "Celebrating Innovation," I felt something crystallize inside me, hard and sharp as a diamond. Victor thought he knew me, thought he could predict my moves like I was a chess piece on his board. He believed I would choose survival over dignity, stability over self-respect, that I would return Monday morning, diminished and compliant, grateful to still have a job at all. He was wrong about one crucial thing: I wasn't going to crawl back to my desk Monday morning. By Monday morning, there wouldn't be a desk to crawl back to, or a company, or an empire. The loading dock's exit door slammed behind us as we entered the parking garage. The sound echoed like a judge's gavel, final and irrevocable. Victor Langford had just passed his own sentence, delivered his own verdict with those poisonous words. He thought I would stay silent, subdued by fear and circumstance. He was about to learn that silence can be the most dangerous sound in the world, the quiet before the explosion, the pause before the hurricane, the moment before a carefully constructed empire discovers its foundation has been methodically, purposefully, irreversibly compromised. Monday morning was coming. But not the Monday Victor expected. Back in my home office, surrounded by the blue glow of multiple monitors, I pulled up the contracts that had become my obsession 2 years ago. It was 3:45 a.m. Sophia long since asleep, but my mind was electric with purpose. The screen displayed thousands of pages of legal documentation, the infrastructure agreements that kept Dynacor's global operations running. 2 years ago, I'd been tasked with overseeing the complete overhaul of our international contracts. Victor had thrown the project at me like scraps to a dog, considering it beneath his attention. Just make sure we're covered. Elena, don't bore me with details. Those details had consumed 6 months of my life, every clause, every provision, every word scrutinized and refined. The legal team had trusted me implicitly after all, who understood Dynacor's technical needs better than their chief infrastructure architect. But buried within Section 47B of each contract, Subsection 3, Paragraph 12, I had planted something special, my insurance policy, my dead man's switch. The language was deliberately mundane, designed to be overlooked. In the event that the designated chief infrastructure architect's compensation structure is materially altered without mutual written consent between said architect and executive management, all parties acknowledge that system maintenance capabilities may be compromised. Should such alterations occur without proper documentation bearing both parties' signatures, this agreement reserves the right to immediate termination with 24 hours' notice to protect operational integrity. The lawyers had skimmed it, seen technical jargon about system maintenance, and moved on. Victor had certainly never read it. He'd signed the master approval without looking, trusting that his underpaid architect had done her job. I had done my job, just not only the job he'd expected. The clause was replicated across 17 major contracts, the European data center agreements worth $400 million, the Asian Pacific infrastructure deals totaling $600 million, the North American server farms at $300 million, and the crown jewel, the South American expansion project valued at $600 million. Together, they formed the skeleton of Dynacor's global presence, $1.9 billion in total. At the time, I'd told myself it was just prudent protection, a safeguard against the creeping dread that Victor would eventually tire of paying me what I was worth. I'd watched him discard talented people like broken hardware, and I knew my turn would come. I just hadn't expected it to be so public, so cruel. I opened my secure folder, reviewing the authentication logs I'd meticulously maintained. Every contract contained my digital signature as Chief Infrastructure Architect, time-stamped and verified. The blockchain verification I'd insisted on for security purposes meant these couldn't be altered retroactively. Victor had praised my thoroughness at the time, not understanding he was complimenting the architecture of his own downfall. The beauty of the clause wasn't just its existence, it was its activation mechanism. The contracts didn't require me to do anything. They were designed to protect the company from exactly what Victor had done, destabilizing critical personnel without proper transition planning. The moment he'd unilaterally changed my compensation without my written consent, he'd triggered the termination provision. But the contracts were sleeping giants. They needed to be awakened. I pulled up the notification system I'd built into our infrastructure, another security feature Victor had approved without understanding. Each contract was tied to an automated monitoring system that tracked compliance. All I had to do was update my personnel file to reflect the new compensation structure Victor had announced. The system would do the rest. It would recognize the unauthorized change. It would cross-reference the contract provisions. It would initiate the 24-hour termination notice to all 17 partners simultaneously. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would be far too late to stop. I thought about the development team in Mumbai who'd been forced to work through Diwali, the security analyst in London who'd been fired for refusing to falsify a report, the countless employees who'd been ground down by Victor's tyranny. This wasn't just my revenge, it was justice for every person who'd ever been crushed beneath his designer shoes. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, but I recognized the writing style immediately. James from Legal, one of the few people who'd actually read the contracts thoroughly. Elena, I saw what happened tonight. Section 47B, subsection 3. I remember questioning it. You said it was important for continuity. I understand now. Whatever you decide. You have 12 hours before the automatic audit runs on Monday morning. Choose wisely. James knew. Of course he did. He'd been the only one to flag the clause as unusual, but I'd convinced him it was standard protection for critical infrastructure roles. He'd been at the gala tonight, witnessed my humiliation. His message was clear, he wouldn't interfere. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the update button. One click would begin a cascade that would destroy everything Victor had inherited, everything he'd taken for granted, everything he'd built on the backs of people he despised. The digital clock on my screen blinked 4:23 a.m. In less than 24 hours, Victor Langford would learn that when you build your empire on someone else's foundation, you should make sure they haven't installed a self-destruct sequence. The contracts weren't just papers, they were bombs I'd planted 2 years ago, never truly believing I'd need to detonate them. Until tonight, until he'd stood there in his Tom Ford suit, surrounded by champagne and sycophants, and decided that humiliating me was worth $500,000 in savings. He was about to learn exactly how expensive that decision would be. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive calm. I'd managed 3 hours of sleep, my dreams filled with cascading code and crumbling towers. By 9 a.m., my phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues who'd witnessed last night's spectacle, their sympathy tinged with relief that it hadn't been them on Victor's chopping block. Then came the email that changed everything. From Victor Langford to Elena Marquez, CC, Board of Directors. Senior Management Team, Subject Compensation Restructuring. Immediate action required time, 9:47 a.m. Elena. Following last night's announcement, please report to my office at 2 p.m. today to formalize your new compensation structure. Bring your laptop and company credentials for the transition. To ensure complete transparency with our board and stakeholders, I've attached the new employment agreement reflecting the adjusted terms discussed. Your signature is required by close of business today. Consider this a generous opportunity to demonstrate your continued commitment to Dynacore Systems. Best regards, Victor Langford, CEO, Dynacore Systems. Attached was a 30-page document that would have made indentured servants weep. Not only did it confirm the 70% salary reduction, but it added new provisions surrendering all intellectual property rights retroactively, waiving any right to severance, and extending the non-compete clause to 5 years. But the final page was what he really wanted: my signature on a document that would override every protection I'd built into the infrastructure contracts. He'd had legal working overnight, trying to close any loopholes. They'd found something, or at least thought they had. Sophia found me in the kitchen, staring at my laptop screen. That bad. He wants me to come in today. To sign this, I turned the screen toward her. She read for 30 seconds before pushing it away. You're not going to sign it? No, I said quietly, but I'm going to his office. Elena. He needs to do this in person. His ego demands it. He wants to watch me sign, to see me broken. I closed the laptop, and I need him to do something for me too. At 1:45 p.m., I stood in Dynacore's lobby, my reflection caught in the black marble walls. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, the same black suit I'd worn to my first board presentation, when I'd saved the company $43 million. Professional, competent, dignified. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt eternal. Each floor that passed was another year of my life spent building this place, another sacrifice on the altar of Victor's greed. His assistant, Margaret, couldn't meet my eyes. He's expecting you, she whispered, her voice heavy with secondhand shame. Victor's office was a monument to excess floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Silicon Valley, a desk that cost more than most people's cars. and his wall of fame photos with politicians, celebrities, anyone whose reflected glory might make him seem important. He stood with his back to me, hands clasped behind him, performing importance for an audience of one. Elena, punctual as always, he turned, holding a Mont Blanc pen like a scepter. I trust you've reviewed the documents. Every word. Excellent. He gestured to his desk where 3 copies lay waiting. Then we can make this quick. Sign here, here, and here, initial here, date here. I approached the desk slowly, picking up his precious pen. It was heavier than I'd expected, worth more than my monthly groceries. You know, Victor, I've been thinking about what you said last night. Oh, his smile was patronizing. Which part? About sacrifice being the cornerstone of innovation. I uncapped the pen, its gold nib gleaming. You were right. Someone does need to make a sacrifice for Dynacore to evolve. I began to sign the first document, my signature flowing across the page. Elena Marquez, Chief Infrastructure Architect. I knew you'd see reason, Victor said, relaxation creeping into his voice. You're too smart to throw away your career over pride. I moved to the second signature line. There's just one thing I need from you, Victor. This isn't a negotiation. Elena? No, it's not. I signed the second line. I just need you to countersign these documents, right here, where it says, acknowledged and approved by CEO. Your signature makes it official. He laughed, already reaching for his personal pen, a different Mont Blanc. Of course, this one with diamonds. You think you're clever, adding conditions fine. I'll humor you. He signed with a flourish, his signature bold and aggressive, pressing so hard the pen almost tore through the paper. Victor Langford, CEO, in ink worth more than most people's rent. There, he said, sliding the documents back to me. Now finish signing. I set down the pen without signing the third document. Actually, I'm done. His face darkened. You haven't completed. Check the signature lines again. Victor, I stepped back from the desk. I signed as Chief Infrastructure Architect. You just acknowledged and approved that I still hold that position, despite the compensation change, without my consent, in writing. The color drained from his face as he grabbed the documents, his eyes scanning frantically. You just validated every provision in Section 47B of our infrastructure contracts, I continued, my voice steady as a heartbeat. The ones that require mutual consent for any material changes to the Chief Infrastructure Architect's compensation. The ones that trigger immediate termination if that consent isn't obtained. You manipulative. Careful. Victor, your signature is still wet. I moved toward the door. Oh, and that third signature line you wanted me to sign, that was the waiver of those provisions. But since I didn't sign it, and you've already acknowledged the compensation change without my consent. His hands were shaking now, the documents rustling like dead leaves. 24 hours. Victor, that's what the contracts specify. 24 hours from the moment you validated the unauthorized change. I checked my watch. That gives you until tomorrow at 2:17 p.m. before $1.9 billion in infrastructure contracts terminate simultaneously. You can't, I'll sue. With what grounds you just provided written proof that you violated the contracts you signed 2 years ago, contracts you never bothered to read. I opened his office door, pausing at the threshold. You were right about one thing, though. Sacrifice is the cornerstone of innovation. You just never realized you'd be the one making it. The last thing I saw before the door closed was Victor Langford, CEO of Dynacore Systems, standing behind his expensive desk with his expensive pen, holding the documents that had just signed his empire's death warrant. Sunday morning erupted like a digital volcano. My phone started ringing at 5:12 a.m. James from legal, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Elena, the automated compliance system triggered overnight. 17 termination notices just went out simultaneously. Victor's been calling emergency meetings since 3 a.m. What did you do? I updated my personnel file to reflect my new compensation structure, I replied calmly, sipping coffee in my kitchen as Sophia made breakfast. The system did exactly what it was designed to do, protect Dynacore from operational instability. The European partners received their notices at midnight their time. They're already activating exit clauses. The Singapore data center called they want confirmation that services will cease by tomorrow afternoon. Through my laptop, I watched Dynacor's internal systems in real time. The panic was spreading like wildfire through encrypted channels. Emergency response teams were being assembled, board members dragged from their Sunday plans, lawyers pulled from golf courses and family brunches. By 7 a.m., the first domino fell. Amsterdam Data Services, our $400 million European hub, formally acknowledged the termination notice and began migration protocols. Their CEO's statement was brief. We respect Dynacor's operational decisions and will comply with all contractual obligations regarding cessation of services. The stock market wouldn't open until Monday, but the financial press was already circling like sharks. My phone buzzed with a text from a reporter at TechCrunch. Hearing rumors about massive contract terminations at Dynacor, can you comment? I didn't respond. The contracts would speak for themselves. At 9:23 a.m., Victor's war room went into full crisis mode, through a contact still loyal to competence over fear. I received updates. The 40th floor was chaos, lawyers spread across 3 conference rooms, their screens filled with contract language they'd never bothered to read before. The head of legal was reportedly near tears, having just discovered the blockchain verification made retroactive changes impossible. Can't we claim duress, sabotage, anything? Victor's voice carried through the phone during a leaked conference call. Sir, you personally signed the master agreements. You also signed yesterday's acknowledgement of the compensation change. The contracts are ironclad. We drafted them that way to protect us from vendors backing out. Then get Elena back here. Make her fix this. Sir, she has no obligation to... I don't care about obligations. Get her here. But I wasn't coming. I was sitting in my garden, watching the sunrise paint the sky the color of Victor's flushed face, while an empire built on arrogance crumbled in real time. By noon, the Asian partners had joined the exodus. Tokyo Infrastructure Corp., Beijing Data Solutions, Singapore Systems, $600 million in contracts evaporating like morning mist. Each termination notice was perfectly professional, citing Section 47B, Subsection 3, Paragraph 12 with clinical precision. The South American expansion project, Victor's pet project, his legacy play collapsed at 1:47 p.m. $600 million meant to establish Dynacor's dominance in emerging markets vanished with a politely worded email from Sao Paulo. Richard Brennan, the CFO, was reportedly hospitalized with chest pains at 2 p.m. The board of directors had assembled via emergency video conference, their faces grave as tombstones on the main screen. How did we not know about these provisions? Board chairman Patricia Huang's voice was ice. Elena Marquez embedded them during the contract overhaul 2 years ago, someone explained. They were approved through standard channels. And nobody caught this. The language was technical, seemed routine. It was designed to protect us from losing critical personnel. Well, it worked, Patricia said dryly. We lost critical personnel and everything else with it. At 3:30 p.m., the death blow came. Dynacor's primary creditors, sensing blood in the water, activated their risk assessment protocols. Without the infrastructure contracts, Dynacor's revenue projections imploded. Lines of credit were frozen. Expansion funding evaporated. The company that had been valued at $3 billion on Friday was suddenly worth less than its office furniture. My phone rang. Victor's personal number. I let it ring. He called again, and again, on the 7th call. I answered. Elena. His voice was broken glass, all sharp edges and scattered pieces. You've destroyed everything. No. Victor, I revealed everything. There's a difference. The board wants solutions. Fix this. I'll restore your salary. I'll double it, triple it. It's too late for that. The contracts have been terminated. The partners have already begun transitioning to competitors. This is extortion sabotage. I'll see you in prison for this. For us. For what? Following the contracts you signed. Updating my personnel file with the compensation structure you announced to 200 witnesses and confirmed in writing yesterday. You did this, Victor. I just made sure the contracts worked as designed. There was silence. Then a sound I'd never heard before, Victor Langford crying. Not dramatic sobs, just the quiet breakdown of a man watching his inherited empire dissolve. "My father built this company," he whispered. "Yes," I said quietly. "He did. And in one weekend, you destroyed it. Not me. You, because you thought humiliating me was worth $500,000 in savings. Please. Goodbye, Victor." I hung up. By sunset, Dynacore Systems had lost $1.9 billion in contracts. Their stock futures were in freefall, and Victor Langford's name was trending on social media alongside words like collapse, incompetence, and corporate disaster. Sophia found me on the porch as darkness fell. Laptop closed, phone silent. "Is it over?" she asked. "For Dynacore." "Yes." I watched the stars emerge, each one a distant sun burning in the void. By market open tomorrow, there won't be enough left to salvage. And for you, I thought about 14 years of sacrifice, of missed moments and stolen dignity. Then I thought about the interviews already being scheduled, the companies that had watched a chief infrastructure architect bring down a giant with nothing but foresight and properly written contracts. For me, I smiled. The first real smile in years. It's just beginning. Monday morning arrived with biblical fury. The New York Stock Exchange opened at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 6:30 a.m. Pacific. I watched from my home office as Dynacore's stock price plummeted 73% in the first hour of trading. Trading was halted twice due to volatility. Financial news channels ran breaking news banners, Dynacore Systems in freefall, and Silicon Valley giant loses $1.9 billion in contracts. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 8 a.m. Pacific. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. 3 different contacts were feeding me real-time updates. Motion to remove Victor Langford as CEO. Patricia Huang's voice came through a leaked audio stream. All in favor. Unanimous. By 9 a.m., security was escorting Victor from the building. His personal items in a cardboard box, the same type of box Marcus Kim had used when Victor fired him for being too competent. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. But the true crescendo came at 10:45 a.m., when Kellerman and Associates, the premier corporate law firm in Silicon Valley, arrived at Dynacore's headquarters, not to save the company but to investigate Victor's personal liability. His decision to unilaterally alter my compensation without board approval, then sign documents confirming it, had violated his fiduciary duty. His personal assets, that fortune he'd inherited rather than earned, were now at risk. The conference room where Victor had once held court became his tribunal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows he'd loved so much, employees gathered to watch his final humiliation. The man who'd ruled through fear now sat trembling as lawyers explained how his actions had created personal liability, potentially exceeding $100 million. "You don't understand," Victor kept repeating, his voice barely a whisper. "She planned this. Elena orchestrated everything." "Ms. Marquez followed every protocol," the lead attorney responded. "She created protective provisions that were reviewed and approved through proper channels. You triggered them yourself. Mr. Langford, she simply allowed the contracts to function as designed." At noon, I received a call from Patricia Huang. "Elena, the board would like to discuss an emergency consulting arrangement. We need someone who understands our infrastructure to help manage the transition." "My consulting fee is $5,000 per hour," I said calmly. "Non-negotiable." There was a pause. "That's substantial." "That's market rate for someone who can potentially salvage a portion of your operations. Of course, I understand if Dynacore can't afford it now." She sighed. "We'll pay it. I'll need that in writing. And Patricia, the contract will include very specific provisions about respectful treatment and mutual consent for any changes." Understood. I didn't take the consulting gig out of kindness. I took it to ensure that the employees who'd suffered under Victor's regime had a chance at severance packages, that the good people trapped in a toxic culture could find safe landings. Over the next 3 weeks, I helped orchestrate the company's orderly dissolution, ensuring that everyone except senior management received fair compensation. Victor Langford's final appearance at Dynacore was in the lobby at 4:15 p.m. that Monday, being escorted out by security as employees lined the balconies to watch. No one said a word. No one needed to. The silence was more damning than any accusation. more final than any verdict. He looked up once, his eyes finding mine where I stood on the mezzanine level. For a moment, our gazes locked, the fallen king and the architect of his destruction. Then he looked away, shuffling out into the California sunshine that would never quite feel the same to him again. 3 months later, I received news that Victor had declared personal bankruptcy. His houses, his cars, his art collection, all liquidated to pay legal settlements. The man who'd inherited an empire and thought himself invincible was reduced to nothing by his own arrogance and a few carefully crafted sentences in contracts he'd never bothered to read. As for me, I founded my own consulting firm specializing in infrastructure architecture and contract security. My first client paid me more in 6 months than Victor had paid me in 3 years. My sister Sophia joined me as COO, and we built something Victor never could, a company based on competence, respect, and the radical idea that brilliance should be rewarded, not exploited. Sometimes, late at night, I think about those 14 years at Dynacor, the sacrifices, the humiliations, the small deaths of dignity I endured, but mostly, I think about that moment in Victor's office when he signed his name with such confidence, such certainty that power was permanent and consequences were for other people. He was wrong. Power built on fear is as fragile as spider silk in flame. Real power comes from understanding the systems, knowing the rules, and having the patience to wait for the perfect moment to reveal that the emperor has no clothes and never did. Victor Langford thought he was playing chess while treating everyone else like pawns. He never realized I wasn't playing his game at all. I was playing mine. And in my game, the architect always wins. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and poetic justice. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please drop a comment below and let's connect. If this tale of turning the tables resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Elena's position? Your stories and perspectives make this community special. Until next time, remember, sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous.